Hello and welcome to Stef Talks Trash. I'm your host, Stefanie Valentic, Editorial Director of Waste 360. Today I'm talking trash with Bob Peoples, the Executive Director of the Carpet America Recovery Effort, or CARE. Carpet is designed in a way that allows it to stand up for years to heavy foot traffic, which makes recovery difficult. We'll be talking about the challenges of carpet recycling, about extended producer responsibility, and about California's carpet recycling law that was enacted in 2011. Let's get started.
First of all, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to talk to you and finally connect with you here. So would you please tell me about CARE and its mission?
Sure. Well, simply stated, CARE's mission is to advance market-based solutions that will increase the landfill diversion and recycling of post-consumer carpet and encourage design for recyclability. CARE came into existence in January of 2002 as a result of a memorandum of understanding that was signed by the federal EPA, at that time about 10 states, a few NGOs, and the carpet industry. And we had three objectives: set some targets and dates by which we would achieve those objectives, issue an annual report to track our progress, and create an independent third-party organization to enable the work. And that's where CARE originated. We are the original third-party organization to implement the goals of the MOU.
So let's talk about carpet recycling. What did the market for recycling carpet look like when CARE was first founded, and how has it advanced and progressed since then?
Yeah, so when we started, I like to tell people it was a blank sheet of paper. There were a couple people that were involved with some carpet recycling, but literally we had no real infrastructure in place. There were very few products to put this into. Markets didn't know that it existed, but more fundamentally, there was not a single piece of equipment that was designed or built to recycle carpet. So it was, you had to buy existing equipment for alternate uses and figure out how to engineer those or retrofit them to do carpet. And then, you may be aware there's about, at that time, there were four main polymer types used in carpet: nylon 6, nylon 6,6, PET, and polypropylene. And for certain applications, you had to be able to distinguish what the polymer was. So I will tell you, in the early days, people used a couple approaches. One was a cigarette, and they put it down on the carpet, and if it melted, they knew it was polypropylene. Number two, people would stand on the carpet on one foot, up on their toe, spin around quickly, and then look at the carpet. And if it was, sort of fused, they knew that was a low melting polypropylene because of the friction. And then they moved to something a little more sophisticated. They got soldering irons where they could control the temperature of the tip, and they would set that either a single tip or they'd come up with dual tips. And what the nature of the polymer was based on if it melted, didn't melt, or only one square of the two melted. So that was in the early days. And since then, we have worked with people to develop handheld portable technology using infrared spectroscopy to identify the different face fiber types. That technology is pretty sophisticated today, and those units cost about $18,000 a piece. So that putting in place sort of a color code for carpet, so that once you identified and separated major bales of carpet, you could color code them. Red, for example, was nylon 6,6. Green was nylon 6, and so on. And then working with equipment manufacturers over the years to find ways to develop technology that was particular to processing carpet. I always tell people that processing carpet is a lot tougher than recycling a tire is. And my analogy is, what do you tie up an aircraft carrier with at the dock? Well, you tie it up with a big, heavy rope. And what's that rope made of? Synthetic fibers. And why? Because they're really, really strong. So carpet is constructed in a way that'll last for 10, 15, 20 years on the floor under heavy foot traffic. So taking it apart is really tough. And because, there's two types of basic constructions. One is what we call cut pile, where if you look down at the top of the carpet, you could see the individual tips of the fibers. And those, if you pulled one of those out, that tuft, the individual fibers that are twisted in that would be anywhere from an inch to maybe 3 inches long in something like a shag carpet. But the other type is level loop, where they don't cut the tips and it just continuous run of carpet down the production line. And if you pull one of those ends, you could pull out a rope that's 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 feet long. Well, think about that wrapping around equipment. Mm-hmm. I've seen with my own eyes a 16-inch stainless steel shaft snapped in half from a wrap from a loop carpet. So this stuff is really strong, and it is a challenge to take it apart and separate the components.
Let's talk a little bit about California's carpet recovery law. There's been a lot of legislation coming down the pipeline between EPR, plastics, all kinds of different materials.
Well, California passed a law that went into effect in July of 2011. And that law required that carpet had to be diverted from landfills and recycled. There was an assessment placed on the sale of new carpet to fund this program. Mm-hmm. And that assessment was a nickel a square yard. And everybody at the time felt that that would be sufficient to fund this program. Well, here we are today. We've increased the assessment multiple times. We're up 700% over the last 10 years. We're at now 35 cents a square yard. And that's about to change again because the original law, AB 2398, which is what kicked all this off, has been modified or amplified, if you will, with AB 1158 and 729. And those required us to add some additional elements to the recycling program, the most recent of which is what we call differential assessments. So today, if you think about it, the paint program in California charges a different assessment depending on if it's a pint or a gallon or a 5-gallon bucket. So you recycle a electronic screen, a small computer screen costs you $1, and I'm making up the number as an example, but $1. But a 48-inch LCD might cost you, $5. And I don't know the exact numbers for the electronics, but that's the differential assessment idea. So somebody came up with the bright idea that it costs us different amount of monies to recycle different types of polymers. So the law states that we have to charge an assessment based on the cost burden to recycle that particular kind of carpet. Well, that's a challenge because normally what you do is you pay more money to recycle the harder to recycle materials. And this kind of turned that concept upside down on its head. But it's complicated a little bit by the fact that the law also says we have to take into consideration post-consumer content in the carpet that's being sold. So we spent a year kind of tearing into all of this and came to the conclusion that differential assessments based on face fiber type could be incredibly difficult to implement and enormously confusing in the marketplace, both for the retailers that have to manage it and for the consumers that have to understand it and make decisions based on it. That and the fact that because of COVID, we made some adjustments in the subsidies and the cost difference for recycling the two primary fibers, PET and nylon 6, really came into parity. So there was no differential required based on the cost burden to recycle those materials. But we also learned in this analysis that our broadloom residential carpets were being recycled pretty much at or above the targeted rates we were required to hit, whereas commercial tile in particular, which represents 20-25% of all the carpets sold, was running a small fraction of that. And so we concluded that as a material, carpet tile needed to have a higher assessment so we could pay more to get it recycled. So that was just approved by Cal Recycle as the approach for differential assessments. We're going to charge 50 cents a square yard as an assessment on carpet tile. If it has greater than or equal to 10% post-consumer content, they'll be charged at 48 cents. And for broadloom carpet, it'll either be no change or it'll go down slightly. So traditional broadloom carpet will be assessed at 35 cents a square yard, which is where it is today. And if it contains greater than or equal to 10% post-consumer content, it'll be assessed at 33 cents per square yard.
So can you explain who exactly is paying for all of these subsidies and how that structure, where that money is going?
Sure. So the consumer pays the assessment on the carpet.
Okay.
The retailer is required by law to show the assessment on the receipt.
Okay.
And has specific language that they have to follow to do that, but they have to collect that assessment. Then the mills who supply that carpet will collect that assessment from the retailers. So that is an arm's length transaction that CARE is not involved in between the consumer and the retailer and the mill. Mm-hmm. Separately, the mills report to CARE every quarter their sales into the state of California. And they're required to issue us a check for the amount of their sales in square yards times that 35 cents a square yard. That goes into a separate fund that CARE uses to pay for three key things. We use it to pay the subsidies to the recyclers to enable recycling, and somewhere between anywhere like right now, 75 to 85% of those monies go to subsidies. The program itself, we're required to do a lot of things in this program by law, like public education and outreach. So there's a fair bit of money spent on producing educational materials, going out to retailers and meeting with them, helping them understand, make sure they're doing the right thing, billboards in communities, e-news that goes out every month, special campaigns of information. We run a public drop-off site program so that we can make carpet recycling available to outlying areas and some urban areas that are underserved by the private collection network. So yeah, we have a private collection network that exists, and it has over 190 individual sites associated with that. That is run by the individual collectors in this program, but they do not cover all the retailers or all the regions of the state. So CARE has implemented a public drop-off site system to fill in the gaps, if you will. And the part of the funds that we collect under our program expenses go to fund the public drop-off sites. And then finally, the third bucket is administration. So we're required by law to pay Cal Recycle their actual costs on a quarterly basis for them to oversee the program. And of course, CARE staff, legal, accounting, operations are part of that administrative piece. That administrative piece typically runs under 10%. So I like people to understand we're really efficient at what we do. We're deploying the funds to a maximum extent possible to enable the program.
Once the carpet gets to the drop-off site, what happens from there?
Yep. So we place containers at the drop-off site. And when those are full, people usually call up, say, I need a swap. So a truck goes out, drops an empty container, brings the full container back to what we call a collector sorter entrepreneur, or a CSE. These are the people that do the initial sort of the carpet, excuse me, and decide what the polymer type is. So remember I talked about that $18,000 piece of equipment. Mm-hmm. They have these things, and they have people trained to go out there, and they put them down on the face of the carpet and identify the face fiber type. And then depending on what their customer needs are, they'll either bale up all that carpet according to face fiber type and ship it to their customer. They probably typically get in anywhere from 5 to 10% of waste. So there is some material that has to go back to the landfill. And of course, if you're familiar with carpet installation at all, there's always trim waste. So when you put it in a closet or whatever, there's little pieces. There's no efficiency around trying to handle every little piece and identify it. So that part of it goes to the landfill as well. And then once those bales of carpet are ready to put on a truck and go, they'll go to the next stage of the process, which is called processing. So processing is where you take the whole carpet and you shred it up into pieces and try to separate the valuable polymeric face fiber from the backing material. So typically carpet is about 50% face fiber and 50% backing. A good portion of that backing is called calcium carbonate. It's a mineral that they use as a very inexpensive filler to extend the adhesive on the back of the carpet. Most carpet has what's called a styrene butadiene rubber or SBR latex adhesive to hold it together. That's very expensive. So by mixing it with a very, very cheap filler, they can get more square yards coverage for that. Calcium carbonate will cost you delivered to your factory floor about 1 to 2 pennies a pound. Keep that in mind when we start talking about subsidies in a few minutes, okay? Mm-hmm. So they do that separation, and the goal is to try to find outlets for all that material. The most valuable material is the face fiber because that's a polymer, and it can go into a variety of applications, from pretty sophisticated high-end applications like engineered thermoplastics. So think about the black plastic parts under the hood of your car. A lot of those parts have recycled plastic in them, and a lot of that recycled plastic does come from carpeting. So for example, under the hood of a Ford F-150 pickup truck, you got about 2 square yards of post-consumer carpet that's been reprocessed to make those plastic parts. And then you've got the backing, which we call PC4. PC4 stands for post-consumer calcium carbonate. Easier to say PC4 than post-consumer calcium carbonate. Mm-hmm. That material has virtually no value in the marketplace. So CARE pays subsidies to enable these operations to take place. So we pay several different subsidies for the face fiber, and then people could take that and sell it in the marketplace. But for the PC4 backing, because there's no real value outlets for that in the marketplace, we pay 17 cents a pound to try to incentivize people to use it so it won't go to the landfill. I emphasize that because remember, I told you that virgin material is 1 to 2 cents a pound. So we're paying an enormous premium to try to keep this out of the landfill. The good news is, for every pound of carpet we collect, the more we can keep out of the landfill, the better our yield is. Yield is, how much of what you collect is actually used and recycled. So right now, our yield has climbed up to about 80% or so, which means we're doing a pretty good job of getting recycling outlets for all the material that's being collected. So that's the processor step. Now, the next step in the sequence is manufacturing. These are the people that take the components from the separated post-consumer carpet and convert them into useful products. And on the CARE website, you can actually download a little brochure that would, give you an example of those products. They cover things from the fiber pad that goes under a carpet to sound and acoustical insulation, to erosion control products. You could go back into new carpet because we have some of that taking place as well, both into the backing of carpet as well as the face fiber of carpet. It's also going into and finding a growing use in what I'll call synthetic lumber. So, exteriors of homes that you want have rot resistance and, you don't have to paint every couple of years. These are very stable, durable polymers that are dimensionally stable with temperature changes and finding a lot of growing applications outside. A good example is decking. You're familiar with synthetic lumber decking. Well, this is the same concept, but it's more for trim and dimensional pieces in housing. So we have some people that only do collection. We have some people that do collection and processing and then sell it to the manufacturer. And we have some people that do all three. Okay. So they're fully integrated, and that's the majority of the people that we deal with. And then we have a few people that only do one segment of that. Okay, so you got a combination. The universe of people doing this, though, is pretty small. We have on the order of 36 folks that we pay subsidies to on a monthly basis to keep this program going.
So is there any legislation that would be impacting the industry in the future?
Well, I think that, California is the only legislative approach to carpet recycling that exists in the world, United States and the world. So it's still considered an experiment. I think we're making some pretty amazing progress now. I think that some of the early expectations were completely unrealistic about how long it takes to execute some of this. I think it took probably 5 years of spinning wheels to really gain traction and understand what works and what moves things in the marketplace. So, for example, I gave you that calcium carbonate, or PC4 subsidy of 17 cents.
Mm-hmm.
When we started looking at all this material going to the landfill, we said, well, we're going to have to put an incentive on that to move it. So we put 7 cents a pound on it. Nobody was interested. We put 12 cents a pound on it. Nobody was interested. When we hit 17, people started to raise their hand, said, hey, I think I can use that stuff. So that's how subsidies are supposed to work, but it takes time to figure it out. And, once you go up to a certain point, it's very hard to come back. So we wanted to approach this thing in a logical fashion. So, some people have referred to this as what we call a market auction. You go out and make a bid and see if you get any traction. If you do, you're in the sweet spot. And if you're not, you got to make an adjustment until you do get to that sweet spot. And then I think outside of California, there's a handful of states, maybe 4 or 5 states, that have looked at legislation over the past several years. I think for a variety of reasons, none of that legislation has made it, up to a vote or been passed into law at this point in time. I think the COVID pandemic was a setback for some of those activities. I think the realization that, you have to charge money to pay for this program, and consumers are not necessarily happy to do that. It depends on where you are, but a lot of people look at this as a tax. Even the California environmental assessment that we charge has been referred to as a tax by certain segments of the population that don't like it. But clearly, carpet recycling, our mission is market-driven solutions, and we're working every day to try to find those market-driven solutions. I think we are at the cusp of starting to see some success here. The chemical and what's called molecular recycling initiatives that are underway right now, I think, have huge potential to change the supply-demand equation for carpet recycling and many other commodity materials. When you have large corporations like Eastman Chemical Company, Procter & Gamble, Shell Oil, Indorama, that step up, and they're investing hundreds of millions of dollars to build new plants to depolymerize and purify the building blocks so you can remake the polymers. And when you do that, they're fully equivalent to virgin quality, and they can go to any application the virgin polymer could go into. And you can, recycle or flywheel those materials around the closed loop again and again and again. When you invest that much money in a plant, you're going to command a 200 or 300 or more million pound a year flow of feedstock into your plant. You got to get very sophisticated about your contracting to ensure that supply. Historically, in the carpet recycling world, contracts were based on a handshake and a relationship, and not really enforceable. I expect the sophistication and the business acumen that the big international players are going to bring to this market are going to be like a rising tide lifts all boats. And the other side of it is, I mentioned cash flow has been an issue for recyclers. We've got companies that string right recyclers out 60, 90, 120 plus days on their payments. This is killing these guys. They can't make payroll. They can't make their lease payments or their utility payments. So I think the big international businesses are going to bring some sophistication and discipline to the supply chain that will also aid the recycling community and bring stability, which is what they need.
Thank you once again for joining me for this episode of Stef Talks Trash. For this and other episodes, please visit waste360.com and don't be trashy.